Hello. In this lesson, we're going to talk about place value with decimal numbers. This is very similar to place value with whole numbers with a couple major differences. So let's take a look at how this will work. First of all, the place value table for decimal numbers is on page 321 of your textbook, but you can always find an equivalent place value table online using your favorite search engine. Decimal numbers are always going to have their focal point be that decimal point. That decimal point separates the whole number from on the left from the part on the right. Everything to the right of the decimal is less than one whole. This number here might look a little bit funny since you typically don't see dollar amounts or money amounts with more than 2 digits to the right of the decimal. You do see this at gas stations sometimes. Oftentimes you'll have digits that are more than 3 places to the left of the decimal or to the right of the decimal with gas because gas stations have pretty thin profit margins. So every little bit counts, and those fractions of a penny will add up if you buy more than 1 gallon. So how do we deal with place value when we're dealing with decimals? Everything to the left is a whole number, so to the left of the decimal point, you'll have your typical place value table for whole numbers, just like you saw before. 1, 10, hundreds, thousands, and so on. To the right, if you look at the right of this, if that 5 weren't there, you'd think of this as 79 cents. That 7 could be 7 dimes. That's 7 dimes, meaning 7/10ths of a dollar, because each dime is 1/10 of a dollar. 10 dimes make up a dollar. So to the right of the decimal point, that very first place value is tenths, with a TH to distinguish it from the tens place. 10 of those would make up one whole. That 9 would be 9 pennies, right? You could have 7 dimes and 9 pennies to make up 79 cents. Pennies, well, you'd need 100 of those to make up a dollar, so those are hundredths. When you're talking about money, you can also call this the cents place, but in general, that's the hundredths place, the second digit to the right of the decimal. Now, you can probably see the pattern here after hundredths would be thousands, and even though we don't have coins to represent this, you can think of this as less than 1 penny, less than a cent. And every time you go further to the right, your numbers are less and less significant. Make sure that when you're dealing with place value in decimals, you're always starting at the decimal point and radiating out either to the left or right. Whole numbers will always be to the left, and decimal numbers or parts will be to the right. Let's take a look at a typical question that might be asked. Let's write the following numbers as words. Well, I'll start with a very easy one. We probably don't need a math teacher to tell you how to write this as a word. Most of you are looking at this and saying, well, that's $4.25, and you're absolutely right. But let's break down the answer so that we understand it. The first part of your answer, the $4, is the part that's to the left of the decimal, the whole. So that $4 is the whole part of that. It's the whole dollar amount. It's everything that's bigger than $1, in other words. The decimal point right here is always going to become the word and. So my decimal point will turn into the word and. That's why we couldn't use the word and when dealing with whole numbers. Next, I'm going to take a look at everything to the right of the decimal, that's our part, and I'm just going to read that as though it were a normal word. That 25 is a 25. And lastly, you need to tell me that the 25 is talking about cents, not dollars. So you're going to tell me the place value of the very last digit. That's always going to be the last part of your decimal number when you're writing it in words. Now again, because we were talking about money, you can write cents here. If this weren't money, you would use the word hundredths instead. That 4-part answer is going to be the same regardless of whether you're dealing with money or not. So let's see if we can use the same 4-part answer to write this number out in words. Now I know if you're just sitting around at a party with your friends, you would just say that this is 2.068. You do sit around and talk to your friends about decimals at a party, right? So the formal way to write this is a little bit different though. If you're writing a formal legal document in a more formal setting, you're going to use that 4-part answer again. We're going to start with the whole number part. That's the part to the left of the decimal, which is 2. So I'm going to write out the word 2. There's that decimal point again, and that's always going to be the word and. Next I'll read out the number to the right of the decimal, that's our part. I can ignore the 0 because it would be a placeholder if I were just reading this as a whole number, and say that that's 68. So I'm going to write 68 next, remembering the hyphen. All the rules for writing whole numbers still apply. And lastly, I need to tell you what the place value is. Well, how many digits to the right of the decimal am I going? I've got 1, 2, and 3. 3 digits to the right of the decimal. Well, let's see, that'll be tenths, hundredths, thousandths. This decimal goes out to the thousandths place, so I have to write thousandths at the end. That's how you'll take a number written in decimal notation and write it in words. Let's go the other way around now. Let's take the following number and write it in decimal notation. 12 and 9 hundredths. Well, if I look at this, I'm going to work backwards using the same exact process. I'm going to take the first word here, which is the number written out as 12, and I'll just write that as the whole number 12. My magic word and is going to become the decimal point. You could also write this as a fraction, but since it asks us to write it in decimal notation, the word and becomes a decimal point. Then I take the next part here, which is going to be my part of a whole, and I write the number 9. I've got to be careful because that 9 has to be in the hundredths place. If I just write 12.9, the 9 would be in the tenths place. In order to make it into the hundredths place, I need to identify where the hundredths place is, and it's 2 digits to the right of the decimal. Well, that other digit has to be filled in with something, so I'm going to put a placeholder in as a 0, and that's why there is a 0 in front of that 9. To summarize, when you're dealing with place values and decimals, always start with the decimal point to identify place values and work your way out to the left or the right. To the left will be whole numbers, to the right will be parts of a whole. When you're going between writing numbers in decimal notation and as words, you're always going to break the number into 4 parts. The whole number first, then the word and, which corresponds to the decimal, the part of the whole, and then the place value of your last digit.